beginning and the ending is business. So if you got your business straight and you're really trying to capitalize and build something and be able to do this for a long time, because some people want it for the moment.
It was just about I seen potential, and when you see, you can see potential in people, but then that's when I saw way more than just potential.
$30 million wired to two brothers from the Magnolia Projects of uptown New Orleans. Full ownership of every master recording they had ever pressed. A record label reported at more than $100 million a year in revenue at its peak.
What was the biggest check that you've seen that was written to you?
$100 million, about.
Diamond chains the size of a closed fist, and a catalog that, by the boss's own telling, still throws off somewhere around $20 million a year without anybody recording a single new song. Now here is the part almost nobody reports correctly. That contract was not the miracle. That contract was the mechanism. The same agreement that made Bryan Williams and Ronald Williams two of the freest black executives in the history of the American record business is the same agreement that would eventually put a father and a son on opposite sides of a Louisiana courtroom over $51 million. So how does the greatest ownership deal in hip-hop history become the weapon that takes apart the family that signed it? The untold side. We go deep on wealth, power, and legacy in the black community worldwide. And this is not the cash money story you have already heard. Not the chains, not the Bentleys, not the bounce records. This is the paperwork. The Magnolia Blueprint. Bryan Williams was born in New Orleans in 1969. His mother died when he was 5 years old. He and his siblings passed through an uncle's house in British Columbia, then through foster care, before their father won them back through the courts. Home became the Magnolia Projects in the 3rd Ward, and by 16, Bryan Williams was under arrest. By 18, he was sentenced to a correctional facility, where he served roughly 18 months before he was acquitted of the charges against him. His older brother Ronald was waiting when he came home. What the brothers noticed on their return was that New Orleans had built its own economy in the dark. Bounce music, block parties, cassettes, moving hand to hand in the Calliope and the Magnolia. Nobody in New York or Los Angeles was paying attention. Therefore, nobody in New York or Los Angeles was taking a cut. In 1991, they founded Cash Money Records, and here is the decision that made every dollar that followed possible, delivered years before anybody would have called it strategy. They refused to sign as artists. Every other talented kid in that city was trying to get signed. The Williams brothers were trying to get others signed to them. They pressed the records. They owned the label. They controlled the catalog before there was a catalog worth controlling. They understood, in the Magnolia, with no lawyer and no money, the thing that most platinum artists would not understand until their second bankruptcy. Fame depreciates. Ownership compounds. If that landed, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the untold half of black wealth lives in paperwork like this, and we go there every single week. But owning a label in New Orleans in 1991 meant owning almost nothing. To turn that principle into money, the brothers needed a bigger machine, and the machine was about to come to them. The foundation years. Through the mid-90s, Cash Money built the way independent labels built. Kilo G first in 1992, then the group UNLV, then a barbershop meeting with a kid named Christopher Dorsey, who became BG. Then a 12-year-old named Dwayne Carter, signed on the spot in 1995, who became Lil Wayne. Then a rapper the brothers reportedly picked up at a bus stop on his way home from work, named Tyrius Gray, who became Juvenile. Their friend Manny Fresh produced nearly all of it, alone. That roster became the Hot Boys, and their debut moved hundreds of thousands of units regionally, with no major distribution behind it. Here is why that number mattered. It was not the money. Regional independent money is small money. It was the proof. It proved that the Cash Money catalog could sell without New York, without Los Angeles, without a major label's marketing department, which meant that when a major finally came calling, the brothers were not applicants. They were leverage. The pivot to ownership. 1998. Universal Records was in a market share war with Sony. Rap Coalition founder Wendy Day and Universal executive Dino Del Valle brought the two sides together. And Bryan Williams walked into that negotiation with a position almost no independent label has ever had, before or since. He did not need them. Most boutique labels in that era were grateful to get 50-50 on distribution. Roc-A-Fella did not have this. Rough Riders did not have this. The Beatles never had this. The deal was reported at $30 million over 3 years. Reported terms gave Cash Money the overwhelming majority of the profit split, with Universal keeping only a slim minority after recoupment. Reports vary between 80 and 85% to Cash Money. Advances on top half of the publishing, and every single master recording stayed with the brothers. Del Valle later put it plainly, saying he made certain they kept the rights to their work because they deserved it. Birdman put it in his own language. He said he refused to let them take anything. They called it hip-hop's Louisiana Purchase. Juvenile's 400 Degrees landed that November and moved past 4 million copies. Chopper City in the Ghetto followed. Guerrilla Warfare followed. Between 2001 and 2003, the label reportedly sold 7 million albums. The brothers had built the thing every executive claims to want. And it is exactly here, at the moment of maximum freedom, that the family began coming apart. The headline asset. Understand what those masters actually are, because this is the entire empire and it is not a building. A master recording is the original recorded performance. Whoever owns it gets paid every time that song is streamed, licensed to a film, sold, sampled, or played in a commercial forever. It does not age, it does not retire, it does not need a comeback tour. Back that ass up. Bling bling. Still fly. Huh. I need a hot girl. Slow motion. Stuntin' like my daddy. Those are not songs on a balance sheet. They are annuities. Consider what that means across a lifetime. An artist who signs away a master gets paid once on the front end in an advance that is technically a loan against his own future work. The owner of that master gets paid every year, forever, on a song recorded in a New Orleans studio before most of the people streaming it today were born. When Back That Ass Up plays in a stadium in Atlanta tonight, in a bar in Houston, in a film, in a commercial, on a playlist in London, the money does not root to the man who wrote it. It roots to whoever holds the paper. That is the whole game. It has always been the whole game. Birdman has said the Cash Money masters still generate at least $20 million a year. Outlets that track private fortunes have valued the label at $300 million or more, driven almost entirely by that catalog. Treat those as estimates rather than filings, because no one has audited them publicly, but the direction is not in dispute. Two men from public housing own the permanent revenue rights to the sound of the American South. And now the uncomfortable question. If the masters were secure, if the paper was airtight, if the money was coming in forever, then why did almost every artist who created that catalog eventually hire a lawyer? Secondary holdings. Because the machine had a second engine, and almost nobody talks about it. The brothers kept half of the publishing. They kept the artist agreements, and Birdman was not only the executive. As half of the big timers with Mannie Fresh, he was also the artist. On records he also owned. Released through the label he also owned. Distributed through a deal he also negotiated. Every layer of that stack paid the same two men. Later came Ronald Oil and Gas, founded around 2010. Came investments in spirits. Came the move to Miami after Hurricane Katrina scattered the roster from New Orleans in 2005. But the diversification was never really the point. The point was that the structure of Cash Money had exactly 2 seats at the table, and when the biggest star in music tried to find a third seat, the whole thing detonated. The equity layer. Mannie Fresh, who produced almost the entire early catalog by himself, left in 2005. He said it plainly. He left over money. Juvenile left in 2001. He later said the reason he left was the same reason most artists leave a label: money. His suit reportedly settled with him, taking half the sales of Juve the Great, and he has since said the money was resolved and he made peace with it. B.G. left claiming financial mismanagement. Turk sued for $1.3 million, alleging in his petition that dozens of songs he wrote were never even registered with the Copyright Office, which would have made royalties impossible to collect. Attorneys for the label reportedly never filed a response. He settled. And then the son. Lil Wayne carried the label for 2 decades. The Carter III moved more than 1 million copies in its first week in 2008. Through his Young Money imprint, he delivered Drake and Nicki Minaj. And by the label's own boasting, those artists were worth billions in career value. In January of 2015, Wayne filed suit in Orleans Parish for $51 million. His petition alleged that Cash Money never registered him as co-owner of recordings he created, that an $8 million advance for the Carter V went unpaid, that quarterly payments stopped, that a contracted escrow was never maintained, and the allegation that reframes everything, that Cash Money had received roughly $100 million in advances from Universal, driven substantially by Young Money artists, and that Young Money never saw an accounting of it. None of that was ever tested at trial. It settled in 2018. Reporting indicated Universal paid Wayne well over $10 million, and that Cash Money itself reportedly paid nothing, which tells you exactly where the leverage lived. Brand and operating businesses. Wayne walked away with something worth more than the settlement. Young Money became his outright, and in June of 2020, according to a lawsuit later filed by his own former manager, Wayne sold the entire Young Money catalog of masters to Universal Music Group for a reported figure in excess of $100 million. The student had learned the lesson exactly. He had also, in the same motion, done to Drake and Nicki Minaj's catalogs approximately what he had spent 5 years accusing Birdman of doing to his. The legacy lever. There is a real inheritance here, and it is not the chains. The Cash Money contract is now taught. Every independent label founder who refuses to trade masters for an advance is quoting the Williams brothers, whether they know it or not. Master P did it at No Limit. Wayne did it at Young Money. The entire modern posture of black artists demanding ownership rather than access traces through that 1998 document. Think about the sequence. 2 brothers out of the Magnolia Projects, one of them a convicted teenager with no industry lawyer and no inherited capital, negotiated better terms out of Universal than the most celebrated act in the history of recorded music ever received. Not because they were louder, because they had built something that already worked without permission, and they were willing to walk away from $30 million if the masters were not in the sentence. That is the transferable lesson, and it has nothing to do with music. Leverage is not what you ask for. Leverage is what you can afford to refuse. And New Orleans still runs on it. The Hot Boys reunited. Juvenile played the Tiny Desk with Manny Fresh and the Louisiana Philharmonic. Birdman and Juvenile made a record together after everything. The blueprint outlived the family that wrote it. The life now. Bryan Williams is in his mid-50s. Ronald Williams, the quieter brother, the one who almost never speaks publicly, is still his partner. Outlets that track these fortunes have reported estimates near $150 million each, though those are estimates and not disclosures. The brothers never split. Not once, not in 35 years. Every other relationship burned. The blood held. The synthesis. Go back to the numbers we opened with. $30 million. Full ownership of the masters. More than $100 million a year at the peak. $20 million a year still arriving. And a father and a son in a Louisiana courtroom over $51 million. Here is the answer. The contract worked exactly as written. That is the tragedy. It was never broken. It was obeyed. Because what the Williams brothers actually owned was never a sound. It was a position. They owned the masters, so they owned the revenue. They owned the publishing, so they owned the residue. They owned the label, so they owned the accounting. They owned the accounting, so they owned the timing of every dollar that reached everybody else. Everyone else on that roster was called family. Only 2 of them were on the paper. Cash Money was never torn apart by its own family. Cash Money was built by 2 men who made certain that only family got ownership, and then discovered that everybody else had been listening to the word and never reading the document. Fame depreciates, ownership compounds, and the people who own it rarely have to raise their voice. Tell me where you land on this. Was the 1998 Universal deal the smartest contract in the history of black music, or the most expensive lesson? Should Wayne have kept the young money masters instead of selling them? Was Juvenile right to make peace? And who on that roster actually got treated fairly? Subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week we open the books on another black fortune that mainstream media never bothered to read. And the story on screen right now is the one you should watch next.